Welcome to Explorer Classroom. My name is Gibbs Kuguru. I am a National Geographic explorer, a shark scientist, and I will be your host for today. At National Geographic, we believe that anyone can be an explorer and that you have the power to make a difference in the world no matter how old you are. Explorer Classroom is here to inspire you with stories from the field and connect you to our National Geographic explorers live to answer your questions. Before we get into today's lesson, I'd like to welcome all of the classes who are joining us today, especially Pond Cove Elementary, Dunbar Intermediate School, John Black PS, Kenilworth Junior High, Barker Middle School, Redwood Cooperative, Armijo Elementary, Ibime Lagos, McClish Middle, Chateau School, QCVA, and finally, Benito Juarez Elementary. Today, our explorer is Sera Tolgay. Sera is an urban planner and cartographer who uses maps to identify critical habitats needing protection. Sera lives in two homes, Istanbul, Turkey, and Brooklyn, New York. Her current work takes her to the Marmara Sea in Turkey. Using open source data, satellite imagery, and drones, Sera raises awareness about watersheds and why we need to protect them. We are so excited that we have Sera here live to share more about her work and answer questions from our audience. Welcome, Sera.
Hi everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so
Yeah,
excited to talk to you all.
yeah, just a pleasure. And we're so excited to learn about your work today. And could you tell us a little bit about yourself and your research?
Absolutely. So thanks for that great intro. As you were mentioning, I'm trained as an urban planner, so you might think I work on buildings and roads and airports, but actually I also specialize in helping our cities and regions restore ecosystems and also adapt to the effects of climate change through nature-based solutions. So I'll give you an example of some of this work from the Princess Islands, which is where I'm from in Istanbul, and where I work on mapping and monitoring critical habitats, working closely with other scientists because I'm not a scientist, but I work closely with these wonderful people to understand where critical habitats are located, so we can advocate for the establishment of marine protected areas or other protected zones in both land and sea. And
Wow,
I'll
that
also show you really quickly for our little show and tell. Oh yeah, I think you were maybe just about to ask.
Yeah, yeah.
This is a
Show
little
it.
drone which I use for some of the mapping work, and a couple maps I have here. I'm going to walk you through these that we use to identify some of these areas. So this is another one that I'll walk you through in more detail.
Yeah, excited to hear more about it. Definitely as part of National Geographic, the geographic part is basically right up your alley. And you mentioned that your work is focused on watersheds. Could you tell us what a watershed is and why they are important?
Yeah. So we'll maybe look at some photos to really understand what watersheds are, but I want to kind of walk through what a watershed really is and how we kind of think about them, especially when we do planning work. So you can think of wherever you are, really, you are living in a watershed. And imagine it's a rainy day outside. And when the rain falls, it doesn't just go into one place, right? It flows down streets, across sort of trees and grass, maybe into a stream or river or wetland. And a watershed is essentially like a big natural bowl where all the rain, snow, and other sort of water resources gather and travel. And it can end up all the way in the ocean, or in my case, in the Sea of Marmara. So it's really kind of a cool way to think about how all these ecosystems and habitats are related through water, because it's so essential. Water is essential for life. It can affect plants, animals, but also cities. It impacts the human ecosystems, which we call cities and towns. So it's really, think of it like a big neighborhood for water. That's what a watershed is. And we can take a look at a couple photos so you can kind of start to think about what that could mean for you. So these are some photos from around the Sea of Marmara in Turkey. So you start with some mountains, forested areas up high in the mountains, and then dams that humans may have built along those waterways. And then you have cities. You can have like these, this is an old aqueduct, the middle sort of left picture going through the city of Istanbul, or you have reservoirs where we store our water. So we can have water supply for our cities. You can then have lakes where the water accumulates. You can have freshwater, wetlands, and habitats. And then the one to the bottom here, that left picture is actually a floodplain forest. So it's salty and it's a brackish wetland habitat that's close to the coastline. And then you end up along the coast, and these islands you see in the middle is where I live and where I'm from. And that's a very sort of interesting kind of place that I got to study in a bit more detail. So I'll share that with you. But if we go to the next slide, you can see kind of a watershed this is a diagram. It's like abstracted, but it's based on a real aerial photo. So here we have the Sea of Marmara, and you can see Uludağ mountain that's kind of covered in snow. So as the snow is an important part of the cycle, of course, as well. As it melts, it goes through streams, and then eventually these streams join rivers. On the way, though, streams can travel through cities and industry, and this really has an impact on our water quality and also the quantity of water that ends up, because we use some of it, less of it sometimes goes into our kind of watersheds and oceans. So I think that probably kind of explains what a watershed is. I'm sure we can get into more of it in the Q&A as well. But I think there's a cool exercise that we'll do now. Think about where you are located in a watershed.
Yeah, man, those images and your perspective on how you see the world essentially from the top down is amazing. I'm sure you have a very unique way of seeing all the different things that go on the ground that we just don't see being on the ground. Okay, folks, we have just heard from Sarah that a watershed is an area of land that drains or sheds water into a specific body of water. For example, streams can drain into a lake. Students, let's think about the part of the watershed you live closest to and take a quick poll. So based on the following options that you see, choose which part of the watershed you think or you spend time in. So the question is, which part of the watershed do you live in or spend time in? And the options here are mountain, river or stream, lake or reservoir, or beach or coastline. And I'm seeing a lot of answers come in with the river or stream at about 40% here, lake reservoir about 25%. Oh, and it's moving a lot. You guys, your answers are coming in real quick now. Still, most people living near a river or a stream. Not so many mountains there, not so many beach or coastlines, and a few more lake or reservoirs. Ooh, this is very interesting. All right. Well, that was so much fun. I think a lot of you live next to a river, which is a very cool geographic point. And Sarah, you mentioned that drones are an important part of your work, and you showed us a really neat drone earlier. How do drones help you create maps?
Yeah, so when we go to a new area, it's really helpful because on the ground you can't see everything. To get a lay of the land. Essentially, with the drone, you're like a bird, like you can see some of the seagulls flying here. This is looking at the Sea of Marmara and Princess Islands. These are some of the last sort of wild beaches that remain. And all the green stuff you're seeing at the bottom here, those are large seagrass meadow habitats. And the drone is helpful because this is winter months, so it's still a little cloudy, the water, but you can really clearly see these seagrass habitats, especially in the summer when you sort of fly through. But it's really nice to do these like seasonal surveys and work with some of the marine scientists who are actually studying some of these areas to start to map them. And seagrass habitats are pretty special because they support a lot of other sort of marine life. And I'm sure gives your shark scientist, maybe you've come across seagrasses in your work. But really, I think the drone is a good place to start first, kind of understanding of where things are, and then can use them as visual aids, but more advanced drones can actually help you see, using infrared light, you can actually see and identify plants even more sort of clearly. So they're different drones, but the ones that I've used, they're cheaper. It's more for kind of an initial understanding of kind of the habitats and places that we're working with. And maybe next we can take a quick look at some of the kind of uh, work that divers are doing. So I work on the mapping aspect, but there's a whole kind of biodiversity survey that marine biologists and divers do. So these photos are on the right-hand side are from them. So we have sea urchins, we have something called the sea cucumber, an anemone, mussels, starfish, jellyfish. So it's a really biodiverse place. This is unique to the Sea of Marmara, but wherever you are in the world, you have all these like different species that really characterize your local marine ecosystem. So there are just a few of them around the Princess Islands here on the screen. And I also want to take you through so how we then go to making a map is we kind of flew the drone around some of these coastlines. We already knew where they were roughly located. I'll just give a quick tips for seagrass meadows. They do like being in kind of the shallower parts of water bodies because they need sunlight to grow. Essentially, they're plants. They like clear water. They also like beaches that are more calm. Typically, if there's sandy beaches, we see more of them, although some of them do survive in slightly more rockier environments. But if you have super rocky, steep places, it's typically harder to find them. But already knowing that, we also wanted to visually check with the drone, and then some other surveys being done to ground truth where these are. And I think this map is cool because the green stuff is all the seagrass meadows, but there are other species in here as well. We kind of use field notes, but also sometimes, I'm sure you're familiar with iNaturalist, you can record their GPS location. So this was a nice way of putting it together because we'll use it to advocate for protection of some of these habitats. I think without showing where it is, like documenting these, it's hard to go to the local government and say, let's just protect this area. It's nice to show the data to them and visually communicate what's going on. So this is why we kind of make these into maps, essentially. And I think next up we have a fun game for you.
Yeah,
Um,
that was stunning.
yeah.
You really inspired me. I mean, I didn't even know that drones could be used for such a thing. And I really want to start seeing if I can use drones in my research, maybe to find shark habitats or something. That's so interesting. So, students, you've just heard from Sarah about how she uses drones to help her map the landscape of a place that she's not familiar with and uses that information to pick her research spots. Now, we want you to put yourself into Sarah's shoes. You have an assignment to study the seagrass at a mysterious island. Seagrass is very important for lots of marine animals, and you want to protect it. You arrive at the island in the middle of the ocean and fly a drone over the landscape to capture this image you see before you. You know the following. Number one, seagrass needs salt water or brackish water to grow. Number two, seagrass likes to be near mangrove forests. Three, seagrass doesn't like areas that are windy. And four, seagrass doesn't like areas that have a lot of rocks. And just by looking at this map created from the drone footage, which area would you choose to study the seagrass? Again, Seagrass needs salt water to grow. It likes to be near mangrove forests. It doesn't like areas that are windy, and it doesn't like areas that have a lot of rocks. Now, knowing this, which area would you choose to study the seagrass in? Students, share your answers aloud with your teacher, and teachers, type the letter that best represents what you hear from your students in the chat. I am looking forward to seeing what's coming in. Okay, from Mrs. Lee's 8th grade, I am seeing D. Redwood Middle School also says D. KJHS, second period, says D. You guys keep them coming in. Keep them coming. B. Lago says D. It's all D in the chat here from also from Mrs. Avila's 3rd grade. Also a lot of D's coming in from YouTube. And honestly, I don't think we are fooling anyone today because the answer
Oh,
is indeed D. Um, you guys are spot on, and for the very reasons we listed before. I mean, number one, it can't be A because there's a mountain, so there's probably not going to be any salt water up there. It's not B because you can see that the water in the lake came from the mountain, which means that it's fresh water, not salt water. C is not it because it is salt water, but there is a lot of wind there. And it's not E because it's salt water, but it's too rocky for the seagrass to actually grow in. So the answer is actually D. Wonderful work, friends. I'm seeing a lot of good use of mapping skills from our young explorers out there. I think we are in safe hands. Our future is secured. Thank you, guys. Sarah, we've learned what a watershed is and how drones and maps help you in your work with watersheds. Now we're curious about what you do with all the information you learn from your research. Could you tell us why this data is important?
yeah, absolutely. I think it's important because we all live in kind of cities or towns and sort of this built infrastructure that's growing, right? But that has an impact on the ecosystems we live in, and especially on watersheds. Because as we build more paved surfaces like concrete, it can really disrupt the flow of water. But the other thing, talking about the pressures of urbanization, is we can end up with a lot of pollution as well. Sometimes our cities don't have the capacity to deal with all of the wastewater that we're producing.
Mm.
And in fact, this is what happened in the Sea of Marmara a couple of years ago. We had this huge algae bloom. That's what you're seeing on the screen. It's this mucky, we call it mucilage. It's mucus from the algae, actually, is what you're
Oh.
seeing. Because they also kind of suck up all the oxygen and really create this kind of dead environment for marine life. So I think this data is important because we're trying to understand, okay, which habitats are being impacted by urbanization, which ones are healthy, and how can we protect them? What can we do to kind of improve the health of our watersheds, essentially? And this is another cool image, I think, because it's from a satellite. It's like taken from space. You can see these algae blooms, the kind of green and yellow strands you see in there. It's really visible from space, so it has a huge impact on marine life. But again, it's all interconnected with that urban environment that surrounds the Sea of Marmara. And in fact, I will say this is only one of 400 dead zones around the world. There are many around the coast, Atlantic coast in the US, around Europe, coasts of India and China. So it's really
Mm.
a global problem, and this is just one example that we see around the world. So I think it would be helpful to talk about what we do with all this information and why it's important to protect these habitats. As I was mentioning earlier, this Marta Bay, where I grew up sort of going swimming, and it's open to the public. It's one of the last kind of remaining natural coastlines in the city of Istanbul. It has, we know, has an extensive seagrass meadow habitat. And there are many like this that are currently not protected. So a lot of development could happen here if we don't put the right protections in place. And as a planner, I'm kind of interested in how we can use mapping, drones, photography to really advocate for these special places. I think we can go to the next slide and take a look at what I meant by rapid urbanization. So again, this is taken from a satellite. You can see the whole region. Usually this should be different shades of green, but in the heavily urbanized areas you see in pink and purple, this is where the dense cities are located. And using satellites, we're able to identify that a lot of forests and coastlines have been urbanized rapidly in the last 20 years. And where we're going, I think, is up to us. So maybe we can go to the next slide and take a look at kind of what we can do. And this is a map showing the whole region. So the dark green shows you the areas that are currently being protected, which is a very small number. And some of them, like those lakes in the bottom, they're protected because of international treaties. There's one called the Ramsar Convention, for example, that's specific for wetland habitats. And birds love these lakes, so those are protected. But there are so many other areas, like the light gray are all the forests, all the coastlines with yellow. None of these are protected. And this is a really big map. So for example, that pink dot that says 9, that was where we were just now in the Princess Islands. So it's just one of many sites that need to be protected. So when you zoom out, you can see how big the problem is. And I think one of the interesting and exciting things going on right now, because we're in year 2024, already 2024, and by 2030, we have this goal of protecting 30% of our lands and oceans. I think we can definitely get there. If you look at this map, we already have a robust forest network, but without protection, these areas could easily urbanize. So I think there is a big opportunity here to really advocate for conservation and on a regional scale, and especially at the watershed scale.
You know, I think that is absolutely stunning. One of my favorite things that you sort of been telling us here is that a simple tool like a map can
Mhm.
change the scope of conservation for all plants and animals. And everyone, you just heard that Sarah mentioned that positive actions can add up. For example, we can ensure we keep trash out of streams that drain into lakes. So what are some ways that you can help protect watersheds or areas in your community? Share your answers in the chat. Students, you can share your answers with your teachers, and teachers, you can go ahead and type those answers into the chat bar, and I will take a look at them just now. So the question is, what are some ways that you can help protect watersheds or areas of water in your community? All right, so KJHS second period says stop littering. That is a massive one, especially when you see how cyclical the system is. Anything you put into a river goes into the sea, washes up on the beach, and then it's this cycle that sort of never ends. And this trash, even if you throw it away one time, it exists in the ecosystem for a long time. And they also said use reusable straws and cups. That is
Yeah.
very handy and cost effective. You're saving money there. Levi says pick up trash. That is actually the next step up from stop littering. So you stop littering and then you actually go out into the field and you pick up trash. You make the environment a better place. Redwood Middle School says advocate for their protection to others in the community. That's a big one. That's a
Yeah.
big one. Talk to the people around you. Tell them how to change their behaviors. Do it for the environment. I'm seeing a lot of picking up trash and using reusable bags, recycling plastic. I love that one. Oh, here's a really good one. Write to our government to create laws to protect them. And that's coming from Mrs. Lee's 8th grade STEM class. You guys are way ahead of the curve. I mean, that's amazing. I love that. That's getting multiple hearts from us. Thank you guys. advocate for the environment. Um, Great work, everyone. Thank you for participating and sharing your answers. Once again, you guys have managed to touch me with your brilliance. The future is bright. That's all I can say. And your communities are lucky to have you. Okay, and thank you, Sarah, for bringing us all into the field for an incredible look at your work. We've had so much fun learning all about watersheds. Now, we are going to kick off the Q&A portion of the show. And if you're watching online, you can send us your questions into the chat bar. We record them all as they're sent in, so be kind to us and please send in each question just one time. And teachers, also let us know who's asking the question so we can give your class or student a shout out. If you're an on-screen guest, get ready with a nice loud voice and I'll tell you when it's your turn. All right, next question comes from Callan on YouTube. Callan wonders if you have any issues with the drone ever getting damaged by the weather or animals.
Wow, that's such a great question.
Yeah.
Very on point. I haven't had an issue, but I know people who've dealt with kind of seagulls crashing in sometimes, or like bumping and damaging a blade. That it hasn't happened to me, but I have noticed that seagulls don't like drones. They go crazy
No.
and start to yell. So I try to be respectful and not fly them too much. If there are a lot of seagulls, to be very careful because I think they find it annoying. It's very clear to me from the few times that I've experienced it. So being careful. I think they're good at dealing with wind, but there are some high wind situations where you can lose control of the drone. So just being careful if there are high wind warnings to not use them. I think being like in an open space without like not in an urban area with a lot of buildings, like also there are places that you shouldn't go. Just being in open areas and being mindful of your surroundings is very helpful. So I haven't had any issues, but I think taking precautions is always really good.
All
But
right.
just as a rule of thumb, if water wants to go somewhere, we shouldn't build there. That would be the first step
Yeah,
to
yeah,
have a respectful distance with it, you know.
I think trying to control something like water is maybe a mistake. It's very powerful. All right. The next question comes from Bruce, a third grader from the Fulton School. And Bruce is wondering, what is the biggest problem facing watersheds in Turkey?
Wow, such a great question. Thank you for that. I think the biggest one at the moment is pollution that I talked about. Some of it is related to the fact that we don't have enough wastewater treatment capacity because our cities grew very quickly in the last 20 years. So our ability to treat that water didn't keep the pace with how quickly cities are urbanizing. That's one of them. But the other one is recently that I became aware of is we're getting less rainfall where I was doing this research. So our reservoirs are really low. So drought is another one. So what's interesting is we talked about flooding, but on the other hand, you also have drought. So I think this is the difficulty with watersheds is that you have to be able to deal with both extremes of having too much water and then having too little. And scientists are kind of working on forecasting, understanding how much and what we can do to build more resilience. But I think the issues are very varied and pollution is definitely on the top, but how we deal with lack of water, especially in this watershed is also going to be important in the future because the maps I showed, there are 27 million people living in that area. So we need to really carefully plan in the future how much we can really grow, but still have enough water for our cities and communities.
Mm. It's just sort of follow-up question, like what would you say like anyone on the ground could do to help, conserve water?
That's such a great question. I think
Yeah.
it starts at home. So when we talked about watersheds, they're really like interconnected. So individual actions do add up. So it's just not what I'm doing, but a city of 10 million, 20 million people, it does add up. So even having water conservation like practices at home, kind of recycling and reusing water. Newer buildings now are requiring, if they're like LEED certified, for example, in America, to recycle water, and for especially flushing toilets, could that be the way we conserve like fresh water? So that, I think that's one. The other one is, I think, kind of advocating for conservation practices through your city government as well. So one of the kind of projects that I started kind of becoming aware of is another kind of really incredible hydrologist who's leading rainwater catchment kind of workshops and systems to start to build these around the city. So you're really trying to help capture water and have it kind of seep into the ground. So the groundwaters, we didn't even talk about the groundwater aspect, but it really allowing water to infiltrate and go into the ground, go into our ecosystems is a good one. And I'll give one final example. One of those areas on the map is called Belgrade Forest, and it's very green, lush forest. And it was actually one of the first protected areas in the entire country. The like Ottoman Sultan in the 17th century, I think they started building dams there. You saw some of the photos in the very beginning. Some of those dams were in that area. So that it's been protected for hundreds of years and it still provides fresh water to the city. So I think at a large scale, protecting our forests is a really kind of good way of ensuring that we ourselves have enough water. So I think it starts with the individual scale at your home, but also in your community. Can you advocate if there are like plans to suddenly like change zoning for green fields or like forests, to be very active and push back. So being involved in that way, I think, is very helpful.
All right, our next question comes from John Black PS. And the question is, how do you know what percentage of land is protected and conserved?
Oh, sorry, can you repeat that?
Yeah. How do you know what percentage of land is protected
Oh,
and conserved? And that's from John Black PS.
no, that's such a good question, and I think it's a hard one to answer because I was trying to get data to map the protected areas. So our forestry and environment government agency releases these areas, so that's how I was able to map them. But there are other degrees of protection which are not as rigorous. So that's why the map is showing these forests, but they're not protected. So if there was a change, someone could build in those areas, right? So I think it's an ongoing thing. So we have the government data, but then we use satellites to see what is really going on in the ground. They said they were going to protect this area. Is that really happening? Some of the things that we were seeing with the mapping is areas that should have been forests were becoming urbanized over time because they were changing the zoning. And what does zoning even mean? It's a planning terminology, but it's essentially, it helps us kind of determine where you can build a house, for example, or where you can even build an industrial building. Where can you build like a commercial mall? Where can you build a school? So zoning plans actually control to the building level where we can build things. So when they change, things become kind of more problematic over time. So one of the things we did was to essentially understand which areas are not being protected so we can advocate for establishment of these new areas in the zoning plan.
Yep, and this goes right back to that advocacy thing we talked about before. What final message do you have for all the future explorers out there?
Absolutely. Wow. So it's so cool to meet you guys. You've asked really hard questions and really good ones. I think just working, thankfully, with Nat Geo, but also kind of being out in the field, I really see how interconnected all these issues are. I became passionate about watersheds because, as we were talking about, the fact that water touches everything and all of us, I think exploring not just like, I mean, it's so cool to go explore Everest. That's what we think about when you think about an explorer. But actually, there's so many explorers I've met who work on issues in their communities, trying to make a difference. So I think go explore, but also think about your own community, how you could do some of this work where you live, and also connecting with people around the world. There are so many people doing interesting projects that we could learn from and implement in our own communities. So I think, yeah, never stop exploring is definitely something we talk about, but also think about where you live and how you can make an impact. So I feel like research, when it's impactful, can be even more rewarding in my own experience. But I hope that kind of gives you a good sense of how I work, and hopefully that inspired you as well.
Yeah, for sure. And thank you again to Sarah and all the students and teachers watching. We have a very exciting Explorer Classroom season planned. So please register at natgeoed.org/Explorer Classroom. When you register, you can request a chance to be featured up here on screen with us. Join us next week with explorer and underwater filmmaker Shamir Mahmood to see videos from a recent dive off the coast of Cape Town, South Africa, and learn about his work advocating for ocean within his community. Have a great day, everyone. Stay curious and keep exploring. I'll see you next time. Ciao.